If you've looked at your hairbrush recently and felt that quiet knot in your stomach because there's just more hair there than there used to be, then stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you may completely change how you see something you eat almost every day. Most women over 50 assume thinning hair is just part of aging, something to accept and move on from. But that belief is exactly why so many never discover what's really happening beneath the surface. Doctors in the United States have been quietly observing a very specific pattern of hair loss in women after midlife. And the surprising part is that it often has less to do with genetics and more to do with daily choices that seem harmless. Even more surprising is that one of the biggest influences may be sitting in your kitchen right now, hiding in plain sight among foods you think are healthy. Because here's the truth. Most women are never told. After 50, your hair doesn't respond the way it used to, not because it's giving up, but because your body is changing the rules. Nutrient absorption slows, inflammation rises, hormones shift, and suddenly the same foods you've eaten for years can either become powerful allies or silent saboteurs. And nuts, of all things, sit right at the center of this story. Some nourish the scalp, support follicles, and quietly help hair grow stronger over time, while others can push your hair deeper into thinning without you ever connecting the dots. That's why today matters, because once you see which is which, you can't unsee it. Let's start by grounding this in what's actually happening to your hair right now. Each strand grows from a tiny follicle embedded in your scalp, and those follicles depend on a steady supply of nutrients, oxygen, and hormonal signals to stay active. When everything works well, hair cycles through growth, rest, and renewal in a balanced rhythm. But after 50, that rhythm often starts to break down. Growth phases shorten, resting phases lengthen, and more hairs fall out without being replaced at the same rate. This is why ponytails feel thinner and part lines seem wider, even if you're not seeing dramatic clumps fall out. What makes this even more frustrating is that many women are doing what they believe is right. They snack on nuts instead of chips, choose salads over sweets, and try to be mindful of their health, yet their hair continues to suffer. And this is where the misunderstanding begins, because not all nuts behave the same way in a body that's past 50. Some deliver exactly what aging follicles are desperate for, while others interfere with absorption, promote inflammation, or quietly disrupt hormonal balance. The difference isn't obvious on the label, but it becomes very clear once you know what to look for. So let's talk about the first nut that can genuinely help, and I want to start here because it's often underestimated. Almonds may look simple, but inside them is something your hair follicles rely on more than most women realize. They're one of the most accessible sources of biotin, a nutrient directly involved in keratin production, the protein that makes up your hair. When biotin levels drop, hair strands become weaker, thinner, and more prone to breaking. And research from American universities has shown that women over 50 are especially likely to be low in biotin without ever knowing it, simply because absorption declines with age. But almonds don't stop there, and this is what makes them so effective when eaten consistently. They also contain vitamin E, which plays a protective role on your scalp. Think of your scalp as soil. Even if you plant good seeds, nothing grows well in damaged ground. Vitamin E helps protect scalp tissue from oxidative stress, the kind of cellular damage that increases with age and slows down follicle activity. When the scalp environment improves, follicles are more likely to stay in the growth phase longer, which is exactly what thinning hair needs. Now, here's the part many women miss. Almonds don't work overnight, and that's why some give up too soon. Hair grows slowly, and follicles respond gradually to better conditions. A small, consistent amount, roughly a handful a day, is enough. Not a bag, not a binge, just steady intake. Over time, many women notice their hair feels less brittle, sheds less during brushing, and holds up better during styling. These are early signs that follicles are stabilizing even before visible regrowth appears. But almonds are just the beginning, because the next nut works on a completely different problem that becomes more common after menopause. As estrogen declines, inflammation quietly rises throughout the body, including on the scalp. You might not feel pain or redness, but chronic low-grade inflammation can disrupt the hair growth cycle in subtle ways. This is where walnuts step in. Walnuts are one of the few nuts that contain meaningful amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, which are known for their anti-inflammatory effects. When inflammation calms, blood flow improves, nutrient delivery increases, and follicles are better able to do their job. But walnuts also offer something else that often goes unnoticed, and that's copper. Copper plays a role in maintaining hair structure and strength, helping prevent strands from becoming fragile and dull. While it won't stop gray hair, it does support the quality of the hair you have, making it more resilient and less prone to snapping. This matters because many women assume hair loss is always about shedding, when in reality, breakage accounts for a significant portion of perceived thinning. When women add walnuts a few times a week, often around 7 to 10 halves at a time, they're supporting hair health from the inside in a way topical products never can. They're addressing inflammation, circulation, and structural integrity all at once. And for many, that leads to a noticeable change in how their scalp feels. Less tightness, less irritation, and a gradual improvement in hair texture. But as helpful as walnuts are, they don't address one of the biggest hidden contributors to hair loss after 50, and that's thyroid function. This brings us to Brazil nuts. And this is where the story starts to connect in ways most women never expect. Your thyroid is a small gland with a massive influence. It regulates metabolism, energy levels, temperature, and crucially, hair growth. When thyroid function slows, hair follicles often shift into a prolonged resting phase, leading to diffuse thinning across the scalp. And one of the most common nutritional reasons for thyroid sluggishness is selenium deficiency. Brazil nuts are one of the richest natural sources of selenium on the planet. In fact, just 1 or 2 nuts can provide what your thyroid needs for the day. Selenium supports the enzymes that activate thyroid hormones, helping keep the entire system running smoothly. When selenium intake is adequate, thyroid signaling improves, and hair follicles are more likely to re-enter the growth phase instead of staying dormant. But this is also where caution becomes essential, because Brazil nuts are powerful. More is not better. Too much selenium can cause problems of its own, which is why moderation is critical. 1 to 3 nuts per day is enough. And for many women, the first sign they're helping is not regrowth, but reduced shedding. Hair stops coming out in handfuls, drains clog less often, and the loss feels more controlled. Only later do new baby hairs begin to appear, especially around the hairline and crown. Now, you might be thinking that between almonds, walnuts, and Brazil nuts, you've covered your bases. But there's one more nut that plays a surprisingly important role in hair health after 50, and it's often misunderstood. Cashews don't always get the attention they deserve, yet they provide zinc, a mineral essential for tissue repair and follicle function. Zinc helps hair follicles move properly through the growth cycle, preventing them from getting stuck in a resting phase. Zinc deficiency is more common in older women than most realize, partly because symptoms are subtle. You may feel slightly more tired, notice changes in taste, or experience slower wound healing, but nothing that screams deficiency. Meanwhile, your hair follicles are struggling quietly. Cashews offer a gentle way to replenish zinc, along with iron and magnesium, which support overall circulation and scalp health. In moderate amounts, about a quarter cup a few times a week, cashews can help hair feel thicker and stronger over time. The strands themselves become more resilient, which reduces breakage and makes styling easier. And this distinction matters because sometimes preserving hair is just as important as regrowing it. But this is also where the story takes a turn, because while cashews can help, they can also harm if eaten incorrectly. And that brings us to the part most women are never warned about. Because for every nut that supports hair health, there's another that quietly undermines it, often in ways that have nothing to do with hair directly. And the first one on that caution list is one most women eat without a second thought, believing it to be harmless or even beneficial. Peanuts may not technically be nuts, but they're treated like them in the diet, and they come with risks that rarely make headlines. They're prone to contamination with aflatoxin, a mold byproduct that stresses the liver. And when the liver is under stress, hormone balance suffers. Hormones and hair are inseparable, especially after menopause. When liver function is compromised, estrogen metabolism can become erratic, androgen activity can increase, and hair follicles may begin to shrink. Add to that the fact that peanuts are a common allergen capable of triggering low-grade inflammation even without obvious symptoms, and you start to see how daily peanut consumption can quietly work against hair health. And yet, peanuts are only the beginning of the cautionary list, because the next nut creates problems through sugar, insulin, and inflammation in a way that catches almost everyone off guard. And that's where this story gets even more important, because what seems like a seasonal indulgence may be contributing to hair shedding months later. But to understand that connection, you need to see how blood sugar, hormones, and follicles are linked in ways no one ever explains. And that's exactly where we're going next. The reason this next part matters so much is because hair loss doesn't usually respond immediately to what you eat. It responds with a delay, sometimes weeks, sometimes months later, which is why so many women never connect the cause to the effect. You enjoy something that feels harmless today, and your hair quietly pays the price long after the memory of that snack has faded. This is exactly what happens with the next nut on the caution list, because the damage doesn't show up right away. It shows up later when you're standing in front of the mirror wondering why your hair suddenly seems thinner for no obvious reason. Let's talk about pecans, because on the surface they look innocent, even beneficial. They're often associated with holidays, family gatherings, and comfort foods, which makes them feel safe. But the way most women actually eat pecans is the real problem. Rarely are they eaten plain. They're usually coated in sugar, baked into pies, mixed into desserts, or candied and sold in glossy bags that make them impossible to resist. And this is where hair health quietly takes a hit. When sugar enters your bloodstream, your body responds by releasing insulin to bring blood sugar back down. That process is normal, but after 50, your cells often become less responsive to insulin. This condition, known as insulin resistance, is extremely common in women after menopause, even in those who are not overweight. And insulin resistance doesn't just affect blood sugar, it directly interferes with hormone balance, especially the activity of androgens. Androgens are often thought of as male hormones, but women produce them too. When insulin resistance is present, these hormones can become more active than they should be. The result is something doctors see constantly in women over 50. Hair follicles gradually shrinking, especially around the crown and part line. The hair doesn't fall out all at once. It becomes finer, weaker, and eventually stops growing altogether. The frustrating part is that this process happens quietly, without pain or warning. So when pecans are consumed regularly in sugary forms, they contribute to repeated insulin spikes. Over time, this creates an internal environment that encourages hair thinning, even if the rest of your diet seems reasonable. And there's another layer to this problem that rarely gets discussed. Pecans are also very high in omega-6 fatty acids. While omega-6 fats are not inherently bad, the modern diet already contains far too many of them compared to omega-3 seconds. This imbalance promotes inflammation throughout the body, including on the scalp. Inflammation doesn't have to be obvious to be damaging. It can exist at a low level, subtly interfering with blood flow, nutrient delivery, and follicle signaling. When inflammation is present, hair follicles struggle to stay in the growth phase. They enter rest sooner and stay there longer. So even though pecans contain some beneficial nutrients, the way they're typically consumed turns them into a hair risk food for many women. Now, this doesn't mean you can never touch a pecan again. The problem isn't the nut itself. It's the preparation, the portions, and the frequency. Plain, unsweetened pecans eaten occasionally are very different from slices of pecan pie, candied pecans, or sugar-coated mixes eaten regularly. But because hair responds slowly, many women never realize the connection, especially when increased shedding appears weeks after the holidays have passed. But pecans aren't the most confusing nut on this list. That title belongs to one that can help or harm depending entirely on how it's used. This is where things get tricky, because the next nut creates problems not by adding something harmful, but by blocking something essential. And this is where many well-intentioned women accidentally sabotage their own progress. Cashews return to the conversation here, but this time from a different angle. Earlier, you saw how cashews can support hair health by providing zinc, which follicles need to grow and repair themselves. But cashews also contain phytic acid, a compound that binds to minerals in your digestive system and prevents them from being absorbed. In small amounts, this isn't a major issue. In large amounts, over time, it becomes a serious problem. Here's how it plays out in real life. A woman hears that cashews are healthy, so she snacks on them daily. She adds them to salads, eats handfuls between meals, and replaces other snacks with cashew-based products. On paper, this looks like a smart choice. But internally, phytic acid begins binding to zinc, iron, and calcium, preventing the body from absorbing them efficiently. And ironically, this can lead to deficiencies even when those minerals are present in the diet. For hair, this is particularly damaging because zinc and iron are critical for follicle activity. Without them, hair growth slows, shedding increases, and regrowth becomes harder. The woman doesn't realize what's happening because she believes she's eating well. The problem isn't the cashews themselves. It's the quantity and the lack of balance. There's also the issue of processing. Cashews are almost never truly raw. They must be heat treated to remove naturally occurring toxins, and many commercially available cashews are roasted with oils, salt, or flavorings. High sodium intake can affect circulation and blood pressure, and good circulation is essential for delivering nutrients to the scalp. When blood flow is compromised, hair follicles are among the first to suffer. So, with cashews, moderation becomes everything. A small portion a few times a week can be helpful. Daily large servings can quietly undo progress. This is why hair health after 50 is never about extremes. It's about understanding how foods behave in an aging body and adjusting accordingly. But even with all of this in mind, there's still one nut left that creates the most confusion and arguably the most damage when eaten carelessly. It's often marketed as luxurious, heart healthy, and indulgent in the best way. Yet for hair health, it carries risks that almost no one talks about. And the reason it's so dangerous is because it doesn't feel dangerous at all. Macadamia nuts sit at the top of the caution list for a reason. They're extremely high in fat, especially omega-6 fatty acids. While some fat is beneficial, the sheer density of macadamia nuts makes it incredibly easy to overconsume them. A small handful can contain hundreds of calories and a massive dose of omega-6, tipping the inflammatory balance of the body in the wrong direction. Chronic inflammation is one of the most consistent underlying factors in age-related hair thinning. When inflammation rises, follicles receive weaker signals to grow. Blood flow becomes less efficient. Nutrient delivery slows, and the scalp environment becomes less supportive of new hair. Macadamia nuts, when eaten frequently or in large amounts, quietly contribute to this process. There's also the digestive side of the story. As we age, digestion becomes less efficient. Some women have difficulty breaking down very high-fat foods, and macadamia nuts are among the fattiest foods you can eat. Poor digestion means poor absorption, not just from the nuts themselves, but from other foods eaten alongside them. And when nutrient absorption suffers, hair health follows. What makes macadamia nuts especially problematic is how easy they are to overeat. They're rich, smooth, and satisfying, which makes portion control difficult. Eating straight from the container almost guarantees excess. And because the effects on hair are delayed, the connection is rarely made. Hair sheds months later, and the cause feels mysterious. Now here's the moment where everything comes together. Because when you look at hair loss after 50 through this lens, it stops being random. It stops feeling like something that's just happening to you. Instead, it becomes a response to patterns that can be adjusted once you see them clearly. The nuts that help do so by reducing inflammation, supporting thyroid function, improving nutrient delivery, and stabilizing follicles. The nuts that harm do so by promoting inflammation, disrupting hormones, blocking absorption, or overloading digestion. But knowing this information is only the first step. The real question is how to apply it without becoming overwhelmed, restrictive, or frustrated. Because the goal is not perfection, the goal is consistency. And the difference between women who see improvement and those who don't often comes down to one simple principle that almost no one talks about. But once you understand it, everything changes. This is where most women either make real progress or quietly give up, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because no one ever explains how small choices compound over time. Hair loss after 50 isn't dramatic in the beginning. It's subtle, a little more shedding here, a little less volume there, and because it happens slowly, it feels uncontrollable. But once you understand how patterns work, you start to see that your hair is responding exactly as it should to the signals it's receiving every single day. Think about it this way. Your hair follicles don't know whether today is a good day or a bad day. They only respond to averages. The average level of inflammation, the average hormone balance, the average nutrient availability. So one day of eating something less supportive doesn't matter, but repeating it week after week quietly shifts the average, and that's when follicles change their behavior. This is why the women who see improvement are rarely the ones chasing miracle foods or cutting everything out. They're the ones who make simple swaps and stick with them long enough for their follicles to notice. Choosing almonds instead of peanuts, adding walnuts a few times a week instead of sugary snacks, including one Brazil nut a day instead of guessing what their thyroid needs. These changes don't feel dramatic, but inside the body, they're profound. And here's something important that often gets overlooked. Hair loss after 50 is rarely caused by one single issue. It's usually a combination of inflammation, hormonal shifts, nutrient deficiencies, and slower circulation. This is why topical treatments alone often disappoint. You can massage, oil, and treat the scalp all you want, but if the internal environment isn't supportive, follicles simply won't respond the way you hope. Nutrition sets the stage. Everything else builds on it. One of the most common mistakes women make is expecting regrowth before stabilization. This leads to discouragement. But the first true sign of improvement is almost always reduced shedding. Hair stops coming out in clumps. The brush doesn't fill up as quickly. The shower drain stays clear. These are victories, even if you don't see new growth yet. They mean follicles are no longer panicking. They're shifting out of survival mode. Only after shedding slows do follicles begin producing new hairs, and these new hairs often start as fine, short, and easy to miss. You might notice them as soft baby hairs around your temples or along the hairline. This is not failure. This is the beginning. Those hairs thicken over time, but only if the environment stays supportive. And this is where consistency becomes non-negotiable. Another reason women struggle is because they change too many things at once. They overhaul their entire diet, add supplements, switch shampoos, and start treatments all at the same time. When something improves or worsens, they have no idea why. Hair health responds best to steady, measured adjustments. When you know which nuts help and which ones hinder, you can change just one variable and observe how your body responds over several months. Now, let's talk about timing, because this is where expectations often derail progress. Hair grows in cycles, and after 50, those cycles are longer and slower. On average, hair grows about half an inch per month, but follicles may stay in the resting phase for weeks before growth even begins. This means that changes you make today may not show visible results for 3 to 6 months. That's not a sign that nothing is working. It's simply biology doing what biology does. This delay is why many women give up right before improvement begins. They assume nothing is happening, stop their new habits, and then wonder why their hair never changes. But the women who keep going, even when nothing seems different, are the ones who suddenly notice that their hair feels fuller, stronger, and easier to manage one day, seemingly out of nowhere. In reality, that progress is building quietly all along. It's also important to understand that hair health doesn't exist in isolation. The same choices that support your hair often improve energy, skin, digestion, and mood. When inflammation decreases and nutrient absorption improves, the whole body benefits. Many women report better sleep, steadier energy, and improved digestion after making these changes, even though they started for hair. That's a sign you're moving in the right direction. Now, there's one more layer to this that rarely gets discussed, and it has nothing to do with what you eat, but how your body responds to stress. Stress hormones like cortisol directly interfere with hair growth by pushing follicles into the resting phase. And here's the part that surprises most women. Blood sugar swings, inflammation, and nutrient deficiencies all increase cortisol. So when your diet improves, stress levels often decrease without you doing anything consciously. This creates a positive feedback loop where hair growth becomes more likely over time. This is why the nuts that help are so powerful. They don't just provide nutrients, they reduce stress on the system. Almonds support cellular repair, walnuts calm inflammation, Brazil nuts stabilize thyroid signaling. Cashews replenish zinc when eaten wisely. Together, they create an internal environment that tells your body it's safe to grow hair again. On the flip side, the nuts to limit do the opposite when eaten regularly. Peanuts can stress the liver and promote inflammation. Sugary pecans spike insulin and disrupt hormones. Excess cashews block mineral absorption. Macadamia nuts overwhelm the system with fats that fuel inflammation and digestive strain. None of these cause immediate disaster. They cause slow erosion, and slow erosion is exactly how hair loss sneaks up on women after 50. What matters most now is awareness. Once you know what supports your hair and what undermines it, you're no longer guessing. You're making informed choices, and informed choices repeated consistently are what change outcomes over time. This is how hair health becomes manageable instead of mysterious. But there's still one final piece that ties everything together, and it's the reason some women see dramatic improvement while others see only modest changes, even when they follow similar advice. It has to do with how you structure your habits, not just what you eat. And once you understand this final principle, you'll see exactly how to turn everything you've learned into real, lasting results. The final piece is not about adding something new, and it's not about cutting everything out. It's about structure, because structure is what turns good information into real results. Most women don't fail because they choose the wrong foods. They struggle because their choices are inconsistent. Hair follicles respond to rhythm, not perfection. And once you understand that, the pressure disappears and progress finally becomes possible. Think about how your week actually looks. Some days you eat well, other days life gets busy. That's normal. What matters is what shows up most often. When almonds, walnuts, Brazil nuts, and moderate amounts of cashews appear regularly in your routine, your body starts receiving a steady signal of support. Inflammation stays lower. Nutrients arrive more consistently. Hormones fluctuate less aggressively. Over time, follicles sense that stability and begin behaving differently. This is why small, repeatable habits work better than dramatic plans. Keeping almonds where you can see them, adding walnuts to breakfast a few times a week, choosing one Brazil nut as a daily ritual instead of guessing whether you're supporting your thyroid. These actions don't require motivation once they become habits, and hair responds best when it's no longer competing with chaos. At the same time, limiting the risky nuts doesn't require strict avoidance. It requires awareness. Peanuts don't have to disappear forever, but they shouldn't be a daily default. Sugary pecans can remain a holiday indulgence instead of a weekly treat. Cashews can be enjoyed in portions that help instead of hinder. Macadamia nuts can shift from mindless snacking to an occasional, intentional choice. When these foods stop dominating the pattern, their negative effects fade quietly. One of the most empowering things women discover is that hair loss after 50 is rarely irreversible. Follicles are resilient. They don't need perfection. They need consistency and time. When the internal environment improves, follicles often respond by stabilizing first, then slowly reactivating. This is why patience matters more than intensity. Hair doesn't reward urgency, it rewards commitment. Another crucial point is this: progress is not linear. Some weeks your hair may seem better, other weeks unchanged. This doesn't mean you're going backward. Hair cycles overlap, and shedding can still occur even as new growth begins underneath. The key is to watch trends, not days. Less hair on the brush over time, stronger strands when you style, improved texture and manageability. These are signs that the system is healing, even if visible regrowth is still catching up. It's also worth remembering that hair health reflects overall health. When digestion improves, absorption improves. When inflammation lowers, circulation improves. When hormone signals stabilize, growth becomes more likely. Many women notice that when their hair begins to improve, they also feel more energetic, more balanced, and more confident. Hair becomes a signal, not just an outcome. And here's the most important takeaway of all. There is no single food that fixes everything, and no single mistake that ruins everything. Hair loss after 50 is the result of accumulated signals, and hair regrowth follows the same rule. Every supportive choice counts. Every unnecessary stressor removed helps. Over time, those small shifts add up in ways that feel almost surprising when you finally notice the difference. If you're watching this and feeling hopeful but unsure where to start Start small. Choose one change you can maintain without effort. Let it become automatic. Then build from there. This approach works not just for hair, but for every aspect of health at this stage of life. And I want to leave you with this. Your hair is not betraying you. It's responding to what your body is experiencing. When you listen to those signals and respond with care instead of frustration, your body often meets you halfway. Progress may be slow, but it is real and it is possible. If you found this helpful, share your experience in the comments. How old are you, and which of these changes feels most realistic for you right now? Your story may be exactly what another woman needs to hear. And if you want to continue learning how everyday foods quietly shape your health after 50, stay with me, because in the next video, we'll uncover more surprising choices that either support or sabotage your body in ways you've never been told before.